said the first attack came without warning in quiet California suburbs where darkness concealed a predator who would remain unseen for decades. Residents never imagined a single man was carefully studying their routines, preparing a pattern of terror that would span years. Between 1970 and 1986, fear spread across California neighborhoods as break-ins escalated into something far more sinister. The unknown offender would later be called the Golden State Killer, though. Investigators had no idea how close he truly was. For years, investigators chased fragments of evidence, each clue leading nowhere as the trail of terror continued to expand silently. Survivors described a masked intruder who moved through homes with chilling precision, always vanishing before help could ever arrive completely. Law enforcement agencies across California failed to connect the crimes, unaware they were hunting a single evolving criminal pattern across the state. Each crime scene carried the same unsettling signature, but forensic technology at the time could not identify the attacker yet. Fear spread through entire neighborhoods as families locked doors earlier each night, hoping to avoid the unseen danger outside completely surrounding them. But what investigators did not realize was that the killer was learning from every mistake, becoming more calculated over time. In the shadows of suburban California, a hidden intelligence turned ordinary homes into targets of silent and methodical terror itself. Decades passed as the case grew colder, becoming one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American criminal history ever recorded. Then a breakthrough emerged from science, not witness testimony, changing the direction of the investigation forever and completely in unexpected ways. Investigators began using genetic databases to trace family connections, slowly narrowing down a suspect who had evaded capture for decades. The discovery shocked California, when evidence pointed toward a former police officer living a quiet and ordinary suburban life unnoticed for years. In a disturbing twist, the man trusted to uphold the law had allegedly been the one who broke it repeatedly. As DNA evidence finally aligned with preserved crime scene samples, decades of uncertainty began collapsing into a single identity at last. In 2018, authorities confirmed the identity of the Golden State Killer, ending a 40-year manhunt that spanned generations of fear. For survivors, justice arrived late, but the silence of the past continues to echo through their memories today without fading. The case stands as a chilling reminder that some shadows last longer than the crimes that created them in history. Investigators revisited old evidence boxes stored in basements, hoping forgotten details might finally reveal patterns missed during earlier decades of investigation. Forensic limitations in the 1970s and 80s meant crucial biological samples were preserved but could not yet be fully analyzed. Detectives slowly realized the crimes were not isolated incidents, but part of a coordinated series spanning multiple California counties over years. The pattern revealed a perpetrator who carefully selected suburban neighborhoods with limited lighting and predictable residential routines during late-night hours. Survivors described moments of paralysis as they faced an intruder who controlled every movement inside, said their homes with calculated silence. Each testimony added fragments of a larger picture, yet investigators still lacked the technological tools needed to identify the offender. Cold case units expanded as pressure increased, driven by public fear and growing media attention across the entire state itself. In many homes, the psychological impact lasted longer than the physical crimes, leaving families permanently changed by unseen trauma itself. Evidence storage rooms across California held DNA, samples that would later become key to solving the decades-old mystery eventually. The case remained stagnant for years, slowly fading from public attention while investigators continued reviewing unresolved leads in silence itself. Then modern DNA genealogy introduced a revolutionary method, allowing scientists to connect crime scene evidence to distant relatives for the first time. Investigators uploaded genetic profiles into public databases, carefully mapping family trees that expanded across entire generations in search of unknown suspect. A single DNA match did not reveal the killer directly, but pointed toward a narrowing pool of possible identities within California records. The investigation focused on individuals with law enforcement connections, a detail that would prove crucial later in the case itself. As decades passed, the suspect lived unnoticed, blending into suburban life while the investigation remained frozen in time across California. Cold case detectives, They reopened files that had not been touched for years, driven by new hope in forensic science advancements. The breakthrough came when investigators linked preserved DNA to a distant relative through advanced genealogy mapping techniques for the first time. That connection transformed the investigation from a cold case into an active manhunt with renewed urgency across agencies' statewide coordination. Authorities quietly closed in on a suspect whose ordinary life concealed a history that stretched like decades of crimes unseen. The evidence finally converged, bringing together decades of scattered clues into a single undeniable identity after years of silence in California. The case began shifting when investigators noticed similarities that had been ignored for decades due to lack of centralized crime data systems. Old handwritten reports were digitized, revealing connections between attacks that had once been treated as completely unrelated incidents across counties. Patterns emerged, showing the offender traveled with precision, selecting locations that minimized risk of immediate capture or witness interference entirely. Investigators realized the suspect demonstrated both criminal adaptability and unusual understanding of police response timing in suburban environments. This level of awareness suggested either careful study of law enforcement behavior or possible insider knowledge of investigative procedures themselves. As pressure increased, families of victims continued, pushing for answers, refusing to let the case fade into forgotten history. The emotional weight of unresolved crimes created renewed urgency within law enforcement agencies tasked with reopening cold case investigations statewide. Meanwhile, advancements in DNA technology quietly evolved in laboratories, far from public awareness, but transforming forensic science capabilities entirely. What once required direct evidence now allowed partial genetic traces to build entire identity networks through computational analysis methods. Investigators re-examined stored samples with renewed hope, carefully extracting genetic material preserved for decades under controlled conditions. Each sample carried fragments of history, waiting for technology advanced enough to decode what earlier generations could not understand. The breakthrough came when genealogical mapping connected distant relatives through shared DNA segments previously considered too small to analyze meaningfully. This discovery opened an entirely new investigative pathway, merging science with traditional detective work in unprecedented ways. Authorities began narrowing suspect pools based on geographic location, age range, and historical presence during known crime periods. A former police officer eventually appeared within the narrowed list, a detail that immediately raised internal concern among investigators. The realization that the suspect may have once served law enforcement changed the entire psychological understanding of the case. Investigators moved cautiously, knowing that any mistake could alert a long-hidden individual who had evaded capture for decades. Surveillance intensified quietly as authorities gathered modern DNA samples without alerting the suspect or disrupting ongoing operations. Every new piece of evidence strengthened the link between past crime scenes and a life lived in plain sight. Investigators moved carefully as surveillance tightened around the suspect, ensuring every step remained invisible to a man who once understood police methods. A quiet suburban home became the center of a decades-long investigation as authorities watched from a distance without revealing their presence. DNA samples collected from everyday objects began the final comparison process that would determine whether history was finally closing in on truth. Inside forensic laboratories, scientists worked under strict protocols, comparing genetic markers that linked present evidence to crimes committed decades earlier. Each match increased certainty that the suspect had lived an ordinary life while carrying the weight of an unseen past. Investigators prepared quietly for confirmation, knowing that a single mistake could destroy years of careful surveillance and scientific progress. The breakthrough moment arrived when genetic connections aligned across multiple crime scenes, forming an undeniable pattern that pointed toward one individual. Authorities verified every detail multiple times, ensuring the evidence would stand in court after decades of investigative failure across California. The suspect remained unaware that his life was now under silent observation, surrounded by investigators closing in with absolute precision. Cold case detectives coordinated with multiple agencies, unifying fragmented investigations that had once been separated by geography and time. The emotional weight of the case grew heavier as investigators realized how long the victims had waited for. Say this moment. A coordinated arrest plan was prepared with extreme caution, designed to prevent any possibility of escape or destruction of evidence. As dawn approached, officers positioned themselves near the suspect's residence, waiting for confirmation signals from forensic teams. Inside the home, an ordinary life continued, completely unaware that decades of hidden crimes were about to be exposed. The arrest was executed swiftly, ending a silent pursuit that had lasted through generations of investigators and technological limitations. For the first time in decades, the identity behind the Golden State Killer was no longer a mystery hidden in shadows. Authorities secured the suspect and immediately began processing evidence that would confirm every connection built through genetic investigation. News of the arrest spread rapidly, shocking communities that had lived for years under the shadow of unsolved fear. Survivors and families of victims finally saw movement in a case that had remained frozen in time for far too long. Investigators reflected on the long journey, recognizing how modern science had succeeded where traditional methods had completely failed before. As the investigation reached its final phase, attention turned toward reconstructing decades of hidden movements that had gone unnoticed in plain sight. Every recovered file, every preserved sample, and every testimony now formed a complete timeline of a crime wave that once seemed unstoppable. Investigators realized the true scale of the case, spanning multiple counties and evolving over years without interruption or detection. The suspect's life history was carefully reconstructed, revealing a double existence that had remained completely invisible to those around him. In court preparations, prosecutors built a case designed to withstand scrutiny after decades of scientific and procedural evolution in forensic law. Each piece of DNA evidence was carefully documented, ensuring that no doubt could remain when presented before a jury. Survivors were brought into the process, their voices finally becoming part of a legal system that had long failed to deliver closure. The emotional impact in the courtroom preparation rooms was heavy, as decades of silence transformed into structured legal testimony. Investigators who had worked the case for years reflected on the slow progress of justice and the persistence required to reach this moment. The suspect's quiet suburban identity contrasted sharply with the brutality documented in evidence spanning decades of hidden crimes. Families of victims watched as legal proceedings began, knowing that the world was finally forced to confront what had been buried in time. Forensic experts explained how modern genealogy had transformed criminal investigations, rewriting what was once considered unsolvable history. The case became a landmark moment in criminal science, demonstrating how technology could resurrect truth from even the oldest. Media coverage intensified, turning the courtroom into a global focus point for discussions on justice, memory, and scientific advancement. Yet behind every headline remained the silent weight of decades of suffering endured by those affected by the crimes. As proceedings continued, investigators prepared detailed reconstructions of each confirmed incident for presentation in court. The evidence told a story far larger than any single moment, revealing a long pattern of calculated actions across years. The trial represented not just legal accountability, but a historical reckoning for a case that had defined an era of fear. In the end, the identity once hidden in darkness was fully exposed to history, ending a 40-year pursuit of truth. The Golden State Killer case closed as one of the most significant breakthroughs in forensic history, reshaping how cold cases are solved forever.